Thanks. Thanks to APAL for inviting me. It's the second time I visit your beautiful country here. Thanks to Nick for inviting me. And I've been around about 10, 11 days, sir. And so I have now a little better perspective of your fruit industry. And I can tell you that it's really interesting and amazing for me to learn from your way of growing your apples. It's a funny picture, I know. I didn't know that this is in my orchard. To handle the semi-pedestrian, I use those stills sometimes, and they are pretty nice. Okay, just to show you where I come from, Italy, a small country, and Trentino area is an even smaller region, but they produce actually 70% of the Italian apples in that region. I also underlined the green star where my orchard is. I have 20-hectare orchard in, let's say, near the Adriatic Sea, so on the plain. And I actually now am working mostly on my orchard, apart from the consultancy, because I quit my position as a researcher in 2021. But they say that my orchard is now an experimental orchard, and in fact it is. Well, very quickly, tree architecture is one of the main key factors in the jigsaw puzzle. This is why in the last 15 years in my career as a researcher in San Michele Institute, I focused a lot on this aspect, because every choice, every decision we make is very much linked to the canopy we have. Think about the plant spacing, the rootstock, how we protect the crop, how we can mechanize and automation and everything. It's very much linked to how we train our trees. Just to remind you that the results we have in the orchards are, let's say, come from a combination of good genetics and good cultural practices. And so we normally give a lot of importance to the genetics, of course, because starting with a good seed is #1 priority. Think about the evolution of clones. But we underestimate the importance of the environment in a broad sense, because actually we can manipulate very much our trees, trees that don't come from seeds. We remember that. So they are very, very flexible, and they can be modified very much by our cultural techniques. There are several training systems which are modern, which are, let's say, competitive, appealing. We will go a little bit into these systems. The central leader is definitely the most, let's say, used in the world. It's very effective and still very much used. It gives good performance in yield and quality, but requires quite skilled labor, requires quite a lot of limb bending, quite aggressive chemical and hand thinning. And so it has its own drawbacks, let's say. In particular, I think that there is a lot of structural wood which is not very much helpful in, let's say, in the crop potential. Tatura, it's interesting, we are very close to Tatura here, and it is a very efficient system, no question about it. The light interception we know is great, and therefore the potential, the yield. It has its drawbacks in terms of expensive trellis system. Keep in mind the trees like to grow vertically mostly, so that we must manage the trees just from the outside. Mechanization can be done, but not on both sides of the tree, for example. Just a nice picture in Washington State. Super spindle was very popular in Europe in the 90s because, you know, the higher the number of trees, the higher the early production. But it turned out to be a big business for the nurseries, more than for the growers, because in the long run, those trees are not very manageable and tend to have quite a short lifespan. 20 years ago, Mazzoni Nursery in Italy patented a new kind of tree, which has 2 leaders instead of 1, and was patented as B-Baum, which in German means 2 trees, actually. And it became very popular, not just in Italy, but I would say all over the world. The main reason is that actually we have doubled the number of treetops in this system. And you know that especially the fruit quality in general is higher on the treetops. And therefore we increase the percentage of better quality apples. In fact, we realized these are very, let's say, dated trials back in 26, 28. And we realized that the quality in terms of color was increased by just splitting these trees in 2. And in particular, if you take a look at the let's say, the canopy divided in 3 parts, what we see by doubling the number of treetops, we have almost double the number of fruits and therefore the number of kilos in the upper part of the tree. But we also increase the fruit quality, the red over color of the bottom of the tree, which is a quite important aspect. This is to give you an idea of the quality of the tree we get from the nurseries. In the second leaf, they can achieve this production, which is quite a nice, even production, because they start very low, right above the rootstock. So they divide, they split very well into 2 leaders. Same trees in the third leaf, again very homogeneous. You see how they look like a super spindle actually. So every half a meter you have a leader. This for me it's quite an interesting concept. When we split the tree, the same genotype, let's say tree, into 2, 3, 4, 6, or whatever number of leaders, in terms of vigor, it's very similar to changing passing from a medium rootstock, medium vigor to low vigor, or from a high vigor to a medium vigor. So it has a dwarfing effect. This is actually the trunk sectional area of 1 stem trees, 2 stem trees, 3 stem trees, and so on and so forth. So this is something that has a very practical implication when we decide the new plantings. When we decide a new planting, what do we have in mind? The cultivar, of course, the rootstock, the spacing. There's another variable, which is the number of leaders, which can, let's say, give you the right planting according to the variety, according to the rootstock, according to the site, fertility. All these kind of things mixed together help you to give you a very uniform and productive orchard. So, for example, I have seen very similar orchards if you look from, let's say, half a meter above, but if you look below, you see the number of trees is different because the number of leaders is different. So it's quite an interesting way to adapt to the fertility and the vigor of the soil and the root system. Well, and after increasing the number of leaders, we went a step further, and we asked ourselves, Why don't we get rid of the lateral branching or reduce it to very, very little and to acquire a two-dimensional system? The reason why we should do this is that we have a total uniform fruit exposure from top to bottom. So it makes all the operations that are done by hand very, very efficient, thinning, harvesting in particular. Also, the fruits are held in the same position, so they don't tend to move like they do with the long branching. We can shrink the canopy very much, and therefore we can reduce the alleyways quite much. And also we can apply better any mechanization from the thinning, for example, with the Darby mechanical thinning, the hedging, the leaf removal, for example, is much more effective, the harvest, and so on. So we march towards higher efficiency and more, let's say, and precision horticulture. There are two ways to achieve a two-dimensional system. Oh, possibly, maybe more than two, but let's focus on these two different types. One is vertical shoots, and the other is horizontal. Of course, we've been taught for decades that branches should be horizontal because horizontal gives a better, let's say, productivity, makes a shoot become more productive, and we tend to name suckers the vertical shoots. But what is the difference between a sucker and a treetop? A treetop is just a sucker that was given enough room and enough time to develop flower buds and to become productive. Most of the time we get rid of our suckers because there's no room for them. And therefore we rely on horizontal branches. But why vertical again? Because actually trees like to grow vertically, they don't like to grow horizontally. If you look at the planar, horizontal cordon, whatever you want to call it, with several layers of horizontal branches, it's difficult to rejuvenate, especially the bottom, the lower part of the tree, because the vigor tends to move to the upper part of the tree. In fact, we always fight the tendency of trees to go upright. Look at these two images. One comes from South Africa, the other from Israel. They have something in common. The number of hours they spend in the, let's say, 3 years of training for bending all those branches. There are a lot of white and black strings here to make those branches horizontal, to make them fruitful. What if we actually exploit the tendency that trees have to produce vertical shoots and we allow them to grow? This is what, for example, is done in this spindle, where we actually selected 2 lateral branches and we let them grow, okay? This could be called suckers in the first year. But after a few years, they are not suckers anymore, right? You can see the structure. This is a 3-liter. Let me remind you that Franco Zucconi of the University of Ancona, quite a few decades ago, gave a quite important, let's say, definition of treetop. The treetop is actually something that can draw nutrients according to 3 main principles. One is the verticality. The more we put vertical a shoot, the more it tends to become a treetop. The second is centrality. The distance between, let's say, this and the center of the tree, the foot of the tree, He is an essential part of the drawing of nutrients, which must be taken into account, because actually there is a tendency to go on the center, to pull the nutrients on the center more than on the laterals. The third feature that is important to define, it's the shoot capacity to become a treetop is the level of the terminal bud. So, for example, if we go backwards, it's important that we reach a nice level here. You see the level is pretty homogeneous, so it draws more nutrients, vertical and level, okay? This must be taken into account when trying to establish a multi-leader system. For the same reason, the centrality is normally we end up with 3 leaders. When we use 3 leaders, the central one is dominant. That's why I prefer the 4 leaders. If you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is in my orchard, 2 meters apart, pink lady, 50 centimeters between one leader and another. But in the case of the 4 leaders, we tend to build the outside of the tree at least 1 year before the inside. And this, let's say, compensate the centrality that normally trees have. So we try to, let's say, build the outside of the tree, and then the inside will come and catch up. So after 10, 15, 20 years, the trees are very homogeneous, also in the diameter of this inside leaders. This is actually the same, these are actually the same trees near harvest. As I said, pink lady. Now this block is 17 years old. It was younger then, it was 12 probably. But it looks really, really homogeneous, much more than the 3. This is an example of how we can make an M106 vigorous rootstock look much more dwarfing by increasing the number of leaders. We have 8 leaders, and you see the branching is very limited. It's more dwarfing than an M9. But remember, 106 is not a high performer rootstock, so don't expect a vigorous rootstock, not highly performer, to become a high performer because you make him dwarfed. So the idea is that multi-leader can exploit the vigor very well, but it must work. We must work with vigorous, high-performance rootstock, which do exist actually. Row spacing is a very important variable in the spindle, especially if we use long pruning. If we want 1.5 or 1.7 free spacing, we need to have 4 meters, for example, in this long pruning system. Might be 3.5 if we have shorter pruning, but anyway, it's quite large. While if we use a multi-leader, you see we can achieve quite a large free space, even with 2.5. Okay, so this changes quite a lot of the parameters, the planting distances we have in multi-leader compared to the central leader. Well, just this picture dates back to 1912, just to show you that the multi-leader is nothing new. Lorette in France was doing similar things also on pears, which are even more difficult than apples. These are my pears in Italy. This is a 3-leader Carmen, a very early variety, already picked in Italy. Let's make a step forward toward what I called Guyot, naming it after the French system of training. which is different compared to the B-bomb or the, let's say, the multi-leader in general. It's something beyond the multi-leader. Why? Because in this case, we don't have a fixed number of leaders. The only, let's say, permanent structure is the, let's say, the cordon or the cordons, in this case, two. And the vertical suckers, as we said, transformed in treetops, if you like, are not permanent. So they are used and exploited as long as they don't become too big, and they are replaced accordingly. Note that we have quite a nice outside of the tree, and quite homogeneous branches, vertical shoots. And we are talking about a second leaf. I'm not saying this is the norm, because actually these trees are very nice trees, and they are grown by professional nurserymen that can grow very well young trees, but they look really, really productive. This just to tell you that we started on this system back in 2009. So just to remind you that where the system comes from in terms of, let's say, early attempts. The planting distance for the Guyot, well, actually, okay, I put 2 to 2.4 meters, but normally, let's say we are working with a 2.4, 2.5 meters mostly. But you can see that we have two possibilities. One cordon, simple Guyot, two cordons, double Guyot, and the distance on the row can vary, let's say, from 1.2 to maximum 1.8 on the row for the single, and 1.8 maximum to 2.4 meters on the row with double. So after all, we are talking about a medium low density training system. It looks very intensive. It is intensive in terms of number of rows per hectare, but it's not intensive in terms of tree density per hectare. Well, the initial training of Guyot is more labor intensive than central leader, for sure. So it demands an investment of time in the first 2-3 years. You see in this case, the workers are bending the two leaders opposite to one another. We are talking about Gala in this case. Gala is very fragile. If you split it in let's say, without doing this, it tends to break. This is the only reason why they are doing this. Otherwise, you can also pull them apart, as, for example, I've seen Alessio doing in his experiment orchard. So it's because of avoiding the splitting. But okay, there's an investment in time, no question about it. If we look at let's say, the economics, from a European perspective, with the costs of labor that we have in Europe, more or less, we can say that we save some money, and quite reasonable amount of money, because of the lower number of trees to the hectare, despite the number of rows, which is higher, remember. But we spend more money by bending and by tying the leaders to the wires. But in the end, in the first 3 years, we are almost even, or maybe some less work, especially if we choose a lower number of trees, with a double Guyot in particular. Let me add that the tying of leaders to the wires, which actually is done by using these rubber anchors here. These are small rubber anchors that last more than 10 years. We have them in place for 12 years now, and still, let's say, working. They stretch. They don't make a dent in the shoot, even if the shoots are semi-woody. And you can place very easily 300 to 400 of those in an hour. And I can tell you, I normally have workawayers in my orchard coming from all over the world, people that have never seen an apple tree, and I explain in 5 minutes what I have to do, and they can do it. It's very, very simple. Okay, just a few pictures of, this is actually in the experimental orchard. This is Fuji, quite difficult to grow variety, very high tonnage because of the very narrow, let's say, space between the rows, 2 meters, which is quite challenging. I must tell you that in a commercial orchard, I wouldn't use 2 meters because if you have to pick, let's say, 150, 200 meters in such narrow alleyway, it becomes quite a challenge, especially if you have long trains that tend to drift away. So I would go to 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, 2.3, 2.5 meters. That's what I'm doing in my orchard, for example. This is another variety, Golden Delicious. Very high tonnage, again, 87 tons, semi-pedestrian, so let's say 3.2 meters in height, which means that 70–80% of the crop can be handled from the ground. These are actually my Carmen pears picked 20 days ago in Friuli. You can see, again, the 2 cordons and multi-leader Guyot. Pears are quite more, let's say, more difficult to grow on this system because the centrality for pears is higher than on apples, so they tend to form quite a lot of suckers in this position. And keep in mind that when a sucker is growing too strong, it will stay a sucker for his entire life, so will not become productive. So try and avoid, let's say, shoots, vertical shoots that have too much vigor, because it's very difficult to tame those shoots here, and try to work from the outside inside. Okay, this is what I have seen. This is in the 3rd leaf, the pink lady, in a very, very vigorous area where they use fumigation. They push a lot, and they make quite astonishing productions of pink lady. One concept, interesting concept, is that with a planar system like this, you can, if you want, let's say, make a step forward towards precision horticulture, which means that you can count the buds in winter or the fruits, let's say, after drop, and make easy calculations of what your crop is going to be and adjust it pretty simply, because you know, you can see everything. You count I mean, between the wires we normally use half a meter, so you can say 8–10 fruits per meter, whatever. It's quite simple. This is an example of branchless Guyot, Fuji. Fuji is normally a quite vigorous variety, and you can see all the fruits are on spurs or short brindilla. This especially in the younger phase. Of course, you have to replace them, but this is another story. What I like in this system is that we normally do very early fruit thinning after fruit drop, and it's a coarse passage, very quick, and then we come back after 1 month or whatever, and we make a second passage, which is also fast, because it's not like in a three-dimensional tree where you have to look, inspect under let's say the branches, what's happening, because you can see everything riding on a bike. You can see everything, where the fruits are, and if there are fruits that are not potential, that have no potential, they are, sometimes you leave singles, but they don't grow because they don't have seeds, whatever other reason, and you can spot them very easily. So even multiple hand thinning is justified in this system because you waste very little time. Another important concept is the replacement of the strong branches. So once the branches become too thick, they start to branch excessively. You cannot control them even with summer pruning, summer trimming. Summer trimming can also help, but you remove it and you replace it if needed, because as I said, there's no fixed number. What I like about the multi-leader system in general is that you can rejuvenate, even in, for example, a 4-leader, you can, for example, remove after 10 years one of the biggest in the middle and replace them. But this is even more true in a Guyot system where this is not the exception, it's the rule. After 4, 5, 6 years, depending on the vigor, you start renewing with new ones. Another concept I would like to introduce here, I've seen quite interesting V-trellis system or open tatura system. Well, just a proposal. This is what I'm doing in my orchard. Forget about white cloth because actually it was just an experiment. It turned out not to be necessary. So most of the orchard is without. We grow grass and mow it normally. But these are double rows which look like the tatura, but they have 2 rows vertical. And compared to the system you're very familiar with. What are the advantages, what might be the advantages of double rows? That in the tatura, of course, you do everything from the outside. You cannot pass inside. Or in the open tatura, they told me that it's quite difficult to pass anyway. While in this double rows, actually you pass with both, let's say, by walking here, but also with small tractors. In fact, as you can see here, this is in my orchard again, I have 2.3, let's say, large inter-row spacing where I use normal tractors, not very young ones in this case. And I have smaller, let's say, alleyways, 150 or even 130, where I can use small tractors. And in this case, you see this is a trimming bar from large, trimming bar for narrow. Look at how was my, let's say, my standard orchard with the traditional central leader, very, very vigorous. These are 4 years old trees, very vigorous. And look how they are now, the new systems, where actually the trees, you don't see suckers. It's very hard to find suckers in this system because all of them are exploited or otherwise removed. If you have an extra, okay, there's no room for all of them, of course, but what remains is really just productive wood, let's say, bearing fruit, bearing wood. You see, actually, this is what I do normally, grow grass. And one drawback of the system, I must admit, is that I have to do the weed management of 2 rows instead of 1. While the tatura, you just need 1. No question about it. I actually bought a very simple, very, very simple tank with 2 nozzles, and it's very easy actually to manage also the let's say, inside weeding. Well, fruit counting, it's very simple with this system. We used an application called Plantai, but there are probably others it's very simple to count the fruits. Just a few data in my orchard. This is in the fourth leaf, the production we achieved with the double rows of Pink Lady. So 77 tons, 200 fruits. This is actually the year, 1 year later, so 1, 2, 3. In the fifth leaf, we achieved 89 tons. And a year later, actually, 130 tons. Thanks to the double rows, which, in my opinion, is pretty similar in terms of light interception, very similar to the Tatura. And you can see this is the inside. In this case, I put actually white clothes because this is a 12-year-old orchard where I didn't expect to use small tractors then. I thought I can just walk, so I put a cloth. And in fact, it helps, it gives a little bit of reflection, the white clothes. Okay, another important thing is that with this system, the leaf removal is very, very effective. So while on spindle, we have to lower the speed of the tractor to 1 kilometer per hour. In a Guyot system, you can double the speed to 2.5 kilometers per hour because you are so close to the apples, to the canopy, that it's very effective. Another quite important thing is that actually all the spray management should be reconsidered, rethought in these systems because actually the canopy is so narrow and so continuous that probably there's no need of intelligent, let's say, sprayers that find the gaps, spray more or less. It's easier to have a continuum canopy, I guess, than having an intelligent, sophisticated, and delicate machinery. And we spray every other row. Normally, our growers, my growers that where I advise, they are spraying every other rows, up to 2.5 meters, and they don't find problems. Last point: harvest. Harvest when I know that land is very cheap in Australia, but the problem is that you say, okay, I plant 4 meters because land is cheap. Then all the system is less efficient. Think about harvest. Harvest, if you are very close to the bins, you can put the apple straight in the bins and your efficiency is better. You see those guys up here? They are standing on a 50 centimeters platform, so to speak, and they are picking the tops. This is semi-pedestrian. In these systems, I have often recorded 250, 300 kilos of apples picked per hour. Of course, if you want to pick. Not all the growers do the same, but anyway. And the robotic harvesting, as you can see, is much more manageable. We have worked a bit with Tavel. In the past, I have worked with Tavel. And now I'm working with an Italian company to develop robotic arms. And we are quite confident that with a system like this, it's going to come sooner or later. Okay, so just to conclude, I think that double leader, multi-leader, and Guyot training are effective alternatives to the central leader. The pros are uniform crop quality, lower investment in trees, improved efficiency of labor in terms of hand thinning, harvest, pruning. Pruning becomes very simple. People think that these systems are more complicated to prune. It's not true. They are easier. You need more skill to prune a central leader than to do this I can assure you. Exploitation of egos, suitability to mechanization, and a reduced need of platforms because the trees tend to be shorter. You don't need 4.5 meters tall trees. 3.2 is more than enough to get the same tonnage. Crop protection, as I said, one drawback is definitely there's more investment in time in the first 3 years for the tree shaping, especially if you have poor whips, as unfortunately I think you have the problems of having. And just let me add this. Before they pointed out the rights we have towards the supermarkets, but we have also rights towards the nurseries. So we cannot supply 60 plus diameter pink lady to the supermarkets. So even the nurseryman should supply big caliper, feather trees. I think it will save us a lot of time and money. Thank you for your attention.